Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. For today, we will move to our third chapter. This chapter addresses one of the most critical competencies expected of a registered financial planner. That is the ability to diagnose, quantify, and architect insurance solutions tailored to an individual's or business entity's risk profile. Insurance need analysis is not merely about selling policies. It is a diagnostic discipline that requires the financial planner to function almost like a financial physician, identifying vulnerabilities in the client's financial architecture and prescribing precise coverage to neutralize those vulnerabilities. The subtitle here, that is Advanced Risk Assessment Methodology, signals that this chapter moves beyond basic product knowledge into structured analytical frameworks that underpin professional financial planning practice. Students should appreciate that the material covered here forms the intellectual foundation for every insurance recommendation they will ever make in practice. Without mastering needs analysis, a financial planner risks either under-insuring clients, that is, leaving them exposed to catastrophic financial loss, or over-insuring them, that is, wasting resources that could be deployed more productively elsewhere in the financial plan. Before any insurance solution can be recommended, the financial planner must conduct a thorough diagnostic of the client's situation across three interconnected dimensions. These three elements form what we call the foundational triad, and neglecting any one of them will produce an incomplete or flawed financial plan. The first element is the current circumstances of the client. This involves evaluating the immediate risk exposures the client faces today. What happens if the client dies prematurely tomorrow? What if a critical illness strikes next month? What if a disability ends the client's career next year? The financial planner must identify every current vulnerability, including the risk of premature death, consequences of illness and hospitalization, disability and property loss, and assess whether existing arrangements adequately mitigate them. The key question is whether the client's dependents would suffer financial hardship if any of these risks materialize right now. The second element is the future aspirations of the client. Once current risks are mapped, the planner must look forward. What does the client want to achieve over the next 10, 20, or maybe 30 years? This includes wealth accumulation targets for retirement, education funding goals for the children, and estate distribution wishes. Omitting this element is a common planning failure. The client may be adequately protected against current risks but completely unprepared for future obligations. For example, a client may have sufficient life cover today but no provision whatsoever for funding a child's tertiary education in 15 years. The third element is the resources of the client. Understanding what the client already has is just as important as understanding what the client needs. The planner must audit how the client's resources are arranged, where they are committed, over what duration, and at what rates of return. This audit reveals three critical indicators. First, the client's financial resilience, meaning how well the client can absorb a financial shock. Second, the client's planned funding capacity, meaning whether the client can afford the premiums required for adequate coverage. Third, the client's risk tolerance, meaning the ability to withstand the impact of a contingency materializing without complete financial ruin. The diagnostic imperative at the bottom of the slide, as you can see, is crucial. A risk-based financial solution is never a static product. It requires constant monitoring because all three elements of the triad evolve naturally over time. A client's income grows, children are born, properties are acquired, health conditions emerge, and market conditions shift. The financial plan must be recalibrated continuously to match these changes. There are 5 dominant types of personal risk factors that life insurance is designed to address. These are the pillars that support an individual's financial stability, and the weakening or collapse of any single pillar can destabilize the entire structure. The first pillar is premature death, defined as the demise of an individual while the individual still has the capacity to generate an income. In the Malaysian context, this is generally pegged to the accepted retirement age of 55 years. If a working individual dies before reaching 55, for example, the earning capacity and capability of that individual is destroyed prematurely. This is the most fundamental risk because it permanently eliminates the household's primary economic engine. The consequences cascade through the family, dependents lose their income source, outstanding loans become immediately burdensome, and long-term financial goals, education, retirement, for example, become unattainable. The second pillar is illness, which can be a major cause for both the loss of earning ability and the rapid depletion of accumulated wealth. As medical treatment costs escalate year after year, the need for protection against such expenses becomes even more critical. High medical costs can devastate the individual and family members, and the financial burden is compounded when continued medical attention is required over a prolonged period. In Malaysia, the insurance market has responded with critical illness policies, major medical plans, and HMO arrangements, which continue to proliferate. The third pillar is disability. What makes disability risk particularly important is that it requires insurance coverage even in cases where there are no dependents. A disabled person still needs income to replace what has been lost due to the disablement. Unlike premature death, where the risk primarily affects dependents, disability directly and personally impacts the individual's own quality of life and financial independence. The fourth pillar is retirement, where the main risk is outliving one's assets. In Malaysia, the vast majority of people retire at the company retirement age of around 50, 55 or 58 or maybe 60. Once retired, the individual no longer has the benefit of employment income, and without a reliable and stable passive source of replacement income, the retiree faces financial insecurity. Despite the existence of the Employees Provident Fund, EPF, as a statutory savings instrument, It has been consistently demonstrated that EPF savings are insufficient for most retirees, with funds typically depleting within approximately 3 years of retirement. The fifth pillar is education, where the risk is the insufficiency of funds when money is needed to finance a child's educational program. With education costs rising rapidly at an estimated rate of approximately 6% per annum, planning for education requires early and decisive action. The compounding effect of education inflation means that a program costing 80,000 ringgit today could cost over 200,000 ringgit by the time a young child reaches university age in 16 years. There are two distinct but related financial consequences of premature death, which together define the total economic loss that insurance must address. The human life value curve here illustrates a fundamental concept. As a person ages from their current working age toward their retirement age, their earning potential, that is the present value of all future income they would have earned, gradually declines because the remaining working years decrease. Simultaneously, their accumulated assets should be growing over time through savings and investments. The area between these two curves, where earning potential exceeds accumulated assets, represents the economic deficit. This deficit is the gap that requires insurance intervention. If the individual dies while this gap exists, the dependents suffer a financial shortfall that only an insurance payout can bridge. The first impact is the financial impact on dependents. This is the residual obligation question. Do the dependents have enough wealth to maintain their current lifestyle, or must compromises be made? Can they settle outstanding loans and financial obligations? Here, the planner must determine the amount needed to provide for the continued lifestyle of the dependents, the amount needed for settlement of loans and borrowings, and the amount needed for settlement of other possible financial obligations. These are the immediate, tangible financial consequences that the surviving family faces. The second impact is the loss of potential income. This is the pure economic loss, what the individual would have earned and contributed to the household from the point of death until the expected retirement age. This is a forward-looking measure that captures the total economic value, the family losses when the breadwinner dies prematurely. The distinction matters because even if a family has sufficient current assets to handle immediate expenses, they may still face a long-term financial hardship from the permanent loss of the income stream they were depending upon. Understanding both impacts is essential because the insurance solution must address both simultaneously. A lump sum that covers funeral expenses and outstanding debt but fails to replace the lost income stream will still leave dependents in financial distress within a few years. The human life value concept, generally credited to Dr. Hubner, is based on the individual's income earning ability, or more precisely on the potential income earning ability over the remaining duration of the working life up to retirement. The human life value, or simply as HLV, is formally defined as the present value of the potential income loss by dependents as a result of the person's death. The computation here uses the present value of annuity due or PVAD formula, where PVAD equals A1 plus R multiplied by 1 minus 1 plus R to the power of negative n divided by R. This formula requires three inputs. The first input A represents the annual income needs, specifically the proportion of the individual's salary that is consumed by dependents. Not the full salary, but the portion that supports the family. The second input N represents the time horizon, measured as the number of years from the current age to the age of retirement. The third input R represents the assumed compounding rate of return on the capital sum. To illustrate, consider example 3.2 from your module. Jason Mark, age 30, is expected to retire at the age of 55. His annual earnings are 80,000 ringgit, of which 60,000 is needed to support his family yearly for the next 25 years. At a 6% compounding rate, his human life value is calculated as 60,000 ringgit multiplied by 1.06 multiplied by 12.7834. That is the present value annuity due factor, yielding 813,024 ringgit. This means that if Jason dies today, his family would need approximately 813,024 ringgit invested at 6% to replace his economic contribution until his expected retirement. However, the HLV concept here has important limitations that must be clearly understood. First, the salary is assumed to remain unchanged for the entire period, which is unrealistic since most people receive pay increases over their careers. Second, the interest rate is assumed to be constant throughout the period, ignoring the reality that rates fluctuate. Third, the income need is assumed to be static, ignoring evolving needs such as lifestyle changes and education funding. Okay, fourth, inflation is completely ignored. And fifth, the model assumes zero economic value post-retirement, ignoring the possibility that the person may continue generating income after retirement. Despite these limitations, the HLV serves as a valuable starting point for needs analysis. It gives the planner and the client a concrete numerical target to anchor the decision. As the source, based on your module, at least there is a numerical value to focus on with the client. The planner should then refine the estimate upward or downward based on a more nuanced assessment of the client's specific circumstances. The capital needs method provides an alternative and often more practical framework for determining insurance coverage compared to the human life value approach. It examines the amount of funds required to meet the income needs of dependents, and it comes in two variants that serve fundamentally different objectives. Under the capital liquidation approach, both the principal and a portion of the interest are consumed in meeting the projected income needs. Over a specified period of time, the funds are eventually all used up and there is no residual amount, meaning the future value equals zero at the end of the period. The key advantage of this approach is that it gives the client financial freedom to fix the number of years for which income is needed. For example, a client may want to provide funding for 17 years until the youngest child reaches adulthood, rather than until retirement age. This approach requires a lower initial capital sum compared to capital conservation. As you can see from your module, in example 3.3, Mr. A earns 4,500 ringgit per month and wants to ensure his family receives 3,000 ringgit per month. That is 36,000 ringgit per year for 17 years at a fixed deposit rate of 3.5%. Using the present value of annuity due calculation with future value equals 0, the capital sum required is 471,000 ringgit. Sorry, 471,388 ringgit. After 17 years, this entire sum will be exhausted. For capital conservation approach, sufficient funding is provided so that investment earnings alone supply the income stream without ever depleting the original capital sum. The formula simplifies to present value equals A over R, where A is the annual income needs and R is the interest rate. Using the same example, the capital sum needed under conservation would be 36,000 ringgit divided by 0.035, equaling 1,028,571 ringgit. This is more than double the liquidation amount, but the original capital remains intact perpetually. The choice between the two methods depends entirely on the client's objective. Capital liquidation is focused on meeting income goals for a defined period, which is the core risk management strategy of protecting dependents until they become self-sufficient. Capital conservation, however, serves a dual strategy, providing ongoing income for dependents while simultaneously preserving and transferring wealth to heirs as a permanent legacy. The capital conservation approach will always require a greater amount of capital than capital liquidation, with the difference depending on the income duration and interest rate assumptions. This is the culminating calculation that brings the entire needs analysis together. Once the capital needs have been quantified using either the liquidation or conservation approach, the planner must determine how much additional capital is actually required by subtracting the assets the client already has. Building the total capital need involves aggregating three categories of needs. The first is the income replacement need, which represents the funds required to replace the individual's income and cover daily living expenses for dependents. This is the core calculation derived from either the capital liquidation or capital conservation method. The second is the cash need, which encompasses the immediate lump sum obligations that arise upon death. These include final expenses such as funeral costs, the cancellation of outstanding liabilities such as mortgage loans, the funding of important events such as a child's education, legal obligations including taxes, estate duty, and legal fees, and emergency fund for unforeseen expenses, and religious obligations such as zakat for Muslim clients. The third is the legacy need, which represents voluntary funds created by desire rather than necessity, such as special gifts for selected loved ones or charitable contributions. From this total, the planner subtracts the available assets, which include death gratuity from the employer, liquid savings and investments, EPF balances, and the payout values of any current insurance policies already in force. The difference is the deficient amount, which becomes the insurance target. This is the precise sum assured that the client needs to acquire through new insurance coverage. The source illustrates this with example 3.4, as you can see in your module. Okay. In example 3.4, Raymond Wong has 300,000 ringgit in resources. Under capital liquidation, his total need is 547,908 ringgit. That is cash need 200,000 plus income replacement 267,908 plus legacy 80,000, yielding a deficit of 247,908. Under capital conservation, the total need rises to 1,280,000, producing a deficit of 980,000 ringgit. This integration architecture ensures that the insurance recommendation is precisely calibrated. It avoids both underinsurance, which leaves the family exposed, and overinsurance, which wastes the client's premium dollars. The planner should present both the liquidation-based and conservation-based scenarios to the client, explaining the trade-offs and let the client make an informed decision about the level of protection desired. There are three living risks, meaning risks that materialize while the individual is still alive, as distinct from the death-related risk covered earlier. Each requires a different analytical approach. For disability, the capital conservation approach is strongly recommended over capital liquidation. The reasoning is practical. Disability has an unpredictable and potentially open-ended duration. If the planner uses a capital liquidation and underestimates the duration of disability, the client will be left without funds while still disabled. From your module, there is a clear example. Mr. A earns 4,000 ringgit per month and estimates he would require at least 75% of his income, that is 3,000 ringgit per month or 36,000 ringgit annually upon disability. At a 5% investment run, the capital sum required under conservation is 36,000 ringgit divided by 0.05, equaling 720,000 ringgit. This amount, once invested, generates RM36,000 annually in perpetuity without ever depleting the principal, providing indefinite income support regardless of how long the disability persists. For education, the analytical approach shifts to future value computation because the planner needs to determine what a current educational program will cost in the future after accounting for education inflation. The source estimates education costs are rising at approximately 6% per annum. Now refer to example 3.5 in your module. Example 3.5 demonstrates this. Mr. A's child is 3 years old and will pursue a professional program at age 19. There is 16 years remaining. The current cost is RM20,000 per year for 4 years or RM80,000 total. Compounding RM80,000 at 6% for 16 years yields a future value of RM203,228. This is the amount the client must have available when the child reaches college age. The planner must calculate this future cost and then work backwards to determine how much must be set aside or invested today to accumulate the target amount. This shields the core portfolio from sudden tuition shocks. For retirement, the approach is deficit planning. The core problem is that statutory EPF savings are statistically insufficient, with funds typically depleting within 3 years of retirement at the retirement age, for example, 55 or 56 or 58. The planner must map the client's desired retirement lifestyle cost against current resources dedicated to retirement. Account for the current inflation rate, determine the number of years to retirement, calculate the future value of the retirement fund needed, and identify shortfalls that require additional commitment. Any gap between the required retirement fund and projected EPF savings must be bridged through supplementary investment or insurance products. Now we go to property risk and introduces two fundamental valuation concepts that clients and planners must understand to avoid costly mistakes. Actual cash value or ACV is defined as the replacement cost of the asset minus its depreciation. Depreciation accounts for the reduction in value due to wear, tear, age and other deterioration factors. Insurers frequently use ACV to limit their liability, and this is explicitly stated in most property insurance policies. For clients, this means that a payout based on ACV will always be less than the cost of buying a brand new replacement because the depreciation deduction reflects the age condition of the original item. Replacement cost, by contrast, is the actual capital required to replace or repair the damaged property at current market prices without any deduction for depreciation. For most personal property, replacement cost equals the current market price. For real property, the replacement cost is often determined by an independent appraiser appointed by the insurer. The distinction between these two measures is critical because it directly determines how much the client receives in a claim. The most important practical warning on this side is the average clause penalty, which penalizes underinsurance. Property insurance operates as a strict contract of indemnity, meaning the insured cannot profit from a claim. If a property is insured below its true market value, the average clause applies proportionally. The source provides a clear example. If a house worth 200,000 ringgit is insured for only 100,000 ringgit or 50% coverage, the client is deemed to be carrying 50% of the risk themselves. Therefore, even a partial claim of 100,000 ringgit will only yield 50,000 in compensation, calculated as 100,000 divided by 200,000, multiplied by 100,000. Equally important is the note about overinsurance. Even if the client insures the property for, let's say, 300,000 ringgit, the maximum payout on the total loss is only 200,000 ringgit. That is the actual market value. The excess premium paid for the additional 100,000 ringgit of coverage is a pure waste of capital. The financial planner's role is to ensure properties are insured at their correct market value. There is neither more nor less. There are two interconnected topics: the nature of liability risk and the critical importance of analyzing how death impacts different family structures differently. Regarding liability risk, the most practical way to assess an individual's exposure is to treat it as theoretically limitless. In disputes involving the quantification of liability, it is the legal courts that determine the final quantum, and awards can range from a few ringgit to millions. In practical terms, this means the maximum possible liability loss equals the individual's total personal wealth, which is the most and can be extracted before bankruptcy is declared. The financial planner must therefore ensure that liability coverage is as robust as possible, using experience and legal precedents to guide coverage recommendations. The family structure vulnerability analysis is where the chapter's needs analysis framework becomes more practical. The slide contrasts two scenarios that financial planners commonly encounter. In a single income family, the death of the sole breadwinner instantly destroys the family's entire income stream. There is no backup earning capacity. Total capital investment is mandatory and non-negotiable. The planner must ensure that sufficient sum assured is provided to maintain the dependent's lifestyle without compromise. This is the clearest and most urgent application of the capital needs analysis covered in earlier slides. In a dual income family, the analysis becomes significantly more complex. The death of one spouse may or may not cause financial hardship, depending on how much the surviving spouse earns and how financial obligations are structured. In your module, there is a particularly instructive example. Consider a dual income family where both incomes are pooled for family expenses. The house in the husband's name with a mortgage reducing term assurance, while the car was purchased by the wife. If the husband dies, the mortgage is settled by the insurance and the wife may manage on her income. But if the wife dies, the husband must continue paying for both the car and the house and may be unable to manage family expenses alone. This leads to the critical conclusion that an impact of death analysis must be conducted for each spouse separately. The planner must ask, what is the financial impact if the husband dies? And separately, what is the financial impact if the wife dies? Independent capital, medical and disability plans may be required for both individuals simultaneously. The needs analysis should cover capital sums required upon demise of each spouse, medical and hospitalization plans for each spouse, critical illness and disability needs for each spouse, education needs for children, and retirement needs for both spouses. There are two contrasting strategic approaches to structuring the insurance solution, and understanding when to deploy each is a mark of professional maturity in financial planning. The total needs approach is the gold standard. Its scope involves a comprehensive analysis of all family and estate vulnerabilities across every dimension: income replacement, education, retirement, medical disability, property, and ability. This approach appeals to highly educated client demographics who seek holistic master plans for their financial security. The strategic advantages are substantial. First, it provides a more reliable and complete solution because no major risk goes unaddressed. Second, it generates larger premium cases because the full scope of needs is quantified. Third, it establishes a platform for repeat sales as the planner becomes the client's trusted financial architect. Fourth, it experiences significantly lower policy lapse rates because the client understands why each policy exists within the overall plan. Fifth is the structured professional selling process that resonates with sophisticated clients. The single needs approach focuses on one dominant, immediate vulnerability. There are two main circumstances where this approach is deployed. First, when the client firmly refuses to consider any further analysis beyond one specific need. Some clients are simply not ready or willing to undergo a comprehensive review, and the planner must respect this. Second, when the client's affordability is so limited that a total needs solution is financially impossible. In such cases, the planner must prioritize the most glaring and immediate risk over a comprehensive bill. While the single needs approach is sometimes necessary, planners should always attempt the total needs approach first. The comprehensive approach is not just better for the client, it is better for the planner's practice. Comprehensive plans reduce the risk of policy lapses because clients see the value in each component, create natural opportunities for future reviews and additional coverage, and demonstrate the professional rigor that differentiates a financial planner from a mere policy salesperson. Even after the planner has completed a thorough needs analysis and identified the ideal insurance solution, several real-world constraints can influence or even prevent the execution of the plan. There are 5 most significant variables. The first and most critical variable is insurability, which acts as the ultimate gatekeeper. Even if the client has a clear and urgent need, the case cannot process if the client is not insurable. 3 factors determine insurability: age is the first. Most insurance companies will only offer coverage to individuals below 60 years of age, regardless of their health or wealth. Health is the second pre-existing conditions. Health is the second pre-existing conditions that can render a client uninsurable or subject to exclusions and premium loadings. Occupation hazard classification is the third. Certain occupations carry inherent risk that insurers may decline to cover. The second variable is gender dynamics. Premium structures differentiate by sex based on actuarial data. Female applicants generally receive a 4-year actuarial advantage over males. For example, the premium for a 60-year-old female would be based on the rate for a 26-year-old male. This differential reflects the statistically longer life expectancy of females and directly impacts the cost structure of any insurance solution. The third variable is duration and quantum of need. The planner must match the product precisely to the liability horizon. A short-term bridging loan requires short-term cover, while a lifetime estate legacy requires permanent coverage. The quantum or sum assured must be scaled appropriately to the actual need identified. Under coverage leaves the client exposed. Over coverage wastes premium dollars. The fourth variable is affordability tolerances. Even the most comprehensive plan is useless if the client cannot afford the premiums. The source or based on your module, there is a practical guidance. If the ideal product mix is too expensive, the planner may need to deploy term life insurance initially and then convert to more permanent plans as the client's financial capacity grows over time. That is, it emphasizes that clients' need must come before financial planners' convenience, even if this means more work for the planner. The fifth variable is property ownership proof. For general insurance, the property owner must prove documented ownership at the time of the loss event in order to be indemnified. Without proper proof of ownership, even a valid claim can be denied. One additional factor mentioned in your module, but not separately listed on this slide, is availability of product. The planner must be aware of what product exists in the Malaysian market. Some client needs may be highly unique and not suitable to the product that is available. Based on your module, there is also the example of ensuring an opera singer's voice, which may not yet be available in the Malaysian market. The risks faced by a business individual are fundamentally different from those faced by an employee. As you can see from your module, it describes the business owner as someone who has invested not just capital but time, effort, energy, and passion into building the enterprise. Clients are sought, loans are taken, inventory is managed, and relationships are built. And all of this is generally spearheaded by the owner personally. The business becomes literally a part of the businessman's life. This personal investment makes the business owner uniquely vulnerable because their personal and corporate financial because their personal and corporate financial lives are deeply intertwined. There are three critical fracture points. Fracture point 1 is death or disability of the owner, which triggers a cascade of devastating consequences. The consequences are complete cessation of income, immediate creditor demands for accounts payable to be settled from the estate, cessation of further credit, supply demands for cash payment, write-off of accounts receivable, severe devaluation of inventory, forced sale of fixed assets at fractions of market value, freezing of banking facilities and cash balances for sole proprietorships and partnerships, and compensation obligations to employees for loss of employment. Fracture point 2 is property perils, including fire, flood, theft, staff dishonesty, and other perils that destroy the physical capacity to operate. This can force distressed asset liquidation at severe discounts. Fracture point 3 concerns solution architecture at the corporate level. This requires preserving partnership equity in the event of a partner's death, assuring equitable share pricing in closed corporations, and indemnifying against key man losses. By contrast, the employee paradigm involves limited personal exposure, and employees' risks are primarily personal. A business owner faces all of these personal risks plus the full spectrum of corporate risk simultaneously. A key man is defined as an individual in an organization which contributes so substantially to the earnings of the business that the business would suffer a significant financial loss if that individual were to die, become permanently disabled, or move to another organization. The key man's value lies not just in their salary, but in their relationships, expertise, decision-making ability, and the revenue streams they personally generate or maintain. The corporate cascade depicted on this slide shows the domino effect that follows the loss of a key man. The first domino is the death or disability event itself. This triggers the second domino: creditors demand settlement, banking facilities are frozen, and further credit is cut off. The third domino follows. Revenue collapses as the business loses the key person's contribution, and the supply chain begins to unravel as suppliers lose confidence. The final domino is total business liquidation. There is the ultimate catastrophic outcome where the business ceases to exist entirely. The key man shield is the insurance solution designed to interrupt this cascade. It involves purchasing a life or disability policy specifically on the key employee, with the business as the beneficiary. Upon the key man's death or disability, the policy pays a fixed lump sum directly to the business. This injection of immediate liquidity serves three critical functions. First, it ensures operational continuity by providing the cash needed to keep the business running during the transition period. Second, it satisfies creditors by demonstrating the business's ability to meet obligations, thereby preventing a confidence crisis. Third, it buys the corporate entity the necessary time to recruit and train a comparable replacement for the key man. The two common methods for valuing the potential loss, which are covered in detail on the next slide. There are two established methods for quantifying the monetary value of a key man to the business, which directly determines the sum assured for the key man insurance policy. Method A is the contribution to earnings method. Isolates the exact percentage of corporate net profit mathematically generated by the specific individual. The formula is V equals C multiplied by N multiplied by ANP minus NR multiplied by ANW, where C is the percentage of contribution to earnings attributable to the key man, N is the number of years required to find and train a replacement, ANP is the average annual pre-tax profit over the last 5 years, NR is the percentage return the company will earn without any management, and ANW is the average net worth of the company over the last 5 years. From your module, you can refer to the example of Christopher. Christopher, the general manager of a company, a Zoom company, his contribution is estimated at 40% of total business earnings. His company's average pre-tax profit over 5 years is 136,000 ringgit and average net worth is 630,000 ringgit. With NR at 4%, the earnings multiplier or EM is 126,000 minus 4% of 630,000, which is 25,200, giving 100,000 ringgit. The key man value is therefore 0.4 multiplied by 4 years multiplied by 100,800 equaling 161,280. We assume zero return without management. That is, NR equals 0. The simplified value increases to 0.4 multiplied by 4 multiplied by 126,000 equaling 201,600 ringgit. Method B, the replacement cost method, takes a different approach. By valuing the key man based solely on the raw capital required to train a successor, minus the cost of routine duties. The formula is V equals N multiplied by CS minus RS, where N is the number of years to train a successor, CS is the current salary, and RS is the salary value. RS is the salary value attributable to routine or non-key duties. Using the same example, Christopher's salary is 60,000 per annum and routine duties account for 12,000 ringgit per annum. With 4 years to train a successor, the value is 4 multiplied by 60,000 minus 12,000, equaling 192,000. Both methods involve subjective judgments, particularly around the key man's contribution percentage and the company's performance without management. In practice, the planner may calculate both and present a range to the business owners for their decision. This slide addresses the tax-efficient structuring of employee retirement and death gratuity schemes. A critical area where financial planners add value to business clients by optimizing the cost of providing employee benefits. Corporate gratuity schemes in Malaysia are classified into two categories based on their tax treatment. Under an approved scheme such as EPF, both employer and employee contributions are fully deductible against tax, subject to a ceiling of 19,000 of the employee's earnings. The proceeds received by the retiree are tax-free. This creates a significant tax advantage. Since the mandatory EPF contribution by employers is 12,000, there remains a strategic gap of 7%. There is 90% minus 12% that employers can utilize for additional tax-deductible retirement planning contributions. Under an unapproved scheme, the employer's contributions are not tax deductible and the proceeds received by employees are fully taxable upon receipt. The cost and effectiveness of unapproved schemes is therefore significantly lower and they should generally be considered only when approved scheme limits have been fully utilized. Also from this slide, it highlights the important statutory exemptions. Gratuity payments can be rendered entirely tax-free when they arise from three specific circumstances, which are payment due to critical illness, retirement at the age of retirement age, provided the employee has served the same employer or corporate group continuously for at least 10 years, and death payment to employees' family. Regarding funding vehicles, as you can see in your module, it identifies two structural types. Defined contribution schemes, where contributions are set as a percentage of salary of fixed sum, and defined benefit schemes, where the retirement benefit is predetermined at inception. This can be implemented through three vehicle types: completely insured schemes using products like endowment policies or group life plans, non-insured schemes that are self-administered through trusts, and split-funded hybrid schemes that combine two or more types of contracts to provide the benefits. The financial planner must carefully match the funding vehicle to the employer's needs. If the concern is solely death benefits, a term plan is appropriate. If both death and retirement gratuity are needed, an endowment plan or annuity scheme would be more suitable. The planner must also consider the employer's financial capability, the categories of employees eligible, existing arrangements already in place, and the cost of setup and ongoing maintenance. This final slide synthesizes the entire chapter into a single unifying framework. The central message is that risk does not exist in a vacuum. For a business owner, the death or disability event simultaneously triggers two parallel catastrophes. First is corporate liquidation on the business side, and second is personal estate distress on the family side. A truly professional financial planner must address both domains in an integrated manner. The personal sphere encompasses the individual and family risk exposures covered throughout this chapter. Family income replacement needs, mortgage liquidation requirements, tertiary education capital for children, and retirement capital accumulation. These are funded through personal life insurance, medical plans, disability coverage, education savings plans, and retirement instruments. The corporate sphere encompasses the business risk exposures. Key man indemnification to protect against the loss of critical personnel, creditor shields to prevent businesses collapse when banking facilities are frozen, employee gratuity funding to meet obligations to staff, and partnership equity preservation to ensure equitable treatment of partners or shareholders in the event of death. Comprehensive needs analysis sits at the center, acting as the bridge that integrates both spheres into a coherent financial architecture. The financial must flow in both directions. Personal circumstances affect the business, and business circumstances affect the personal estate. The mastery of this discipline as is As you can see in your module, demands a fundamental shift in professional mindset, from selling singular isolated policies to architecting an integrated financial portrait. The financial planner who can seamlessly coordinate personal protection, corporate continuity, and generational wealth transfer across both spheres is operating at the highest level of the profession. This is the standard that the RFP program prepares students to achieve. For examination purposes, students should be able to identify all components of both spheres, calculate insurance need analysis using HLV, capital liquidation, and capital conservation methods. Apply these methods to both personal and business scenarios. Explain the tax implications of approved versus unapproved gratuity schemes, and articulate why integrated planning across both spheres is superior to piecemeal policy selling.